Noir Navio, War Room. The proof is undeniable. However, that doesn't solve this ever-increasing mystery, Cynthia said as she stared at the readings Jincho had discovered. Unlike previous times, the head officers were absent, leaving only the present 6 individuals to discuss the matter in privacy. A mystery indeed. Drazen raiders rarely mount such large-scale offensives. This could be the prelude to another Scarlet Harvest, Redford commented, and the Akanti present let out a rasping hiss of disgust. It is not unheard of to see rebels, pirates, and other organizations work together with them to achieve their own twisted goals. But to this level, I can't begin to imagine what happened in the months leading up to what we found. A groan escaped his throat, and a frown adorned his brow. I am far more worried about the fact that Drazen raider activity had increased at least half a standard Terran year before Khorne, before Duke Draymore initiated his coup. Redford? Clara asked, delivering a curious glance at the older man. The Drazen raiders, perhaps even the entire damn collective, were warned about the coming coup by someone. Most likely your uncle's benefactors, said the older man. Do you think the Duke had any hand in this? Clara asked, her voice cold as the touch of death itself, and her eyes narrowed dangerously. Redford shook his head while Cynthia reached out to squeeze her friend's hand gently. I can imagine your uncle recurring to many questionable decisions and tactics, but to purposefully fan the flames and stir the embers of the Drazen, knowing full well the danger he'd unleash upon the Principality? I can't see him doing such a thing. And logically, it doesn't make any sense either. Why do such a thing if he first tried to convince the Council of Nobles to name him regent, and then has gone out of his way to avoid plunging us into a catastrophic civil war? Wyatt listened closely, trying to process everything he could understand. As always, he could barely grasp the weight of the political implications spoken, but he could see a clear picture of what was going on. Even with FTL and the new insights that Jincho had shared with them, time and distance were always factors at play in space travel. According to the prince, the Duke had been preparing for at least 2 years, but no concrete evidence was found during that time. Then the Drazen were more or less invited to assault the Principality while it suffered from its internal conflict. More worryingly, at least in his opinion, the Duke had to be either aware of what was happening, choosing to do nothing, or he was unaware of the reason why the Drazen were assaulting with such force. He didn't know the Duke, but from everything he'd heard about the man, he doubted the latter option was even worth considering, which left only one option available. With it, only one answer resonated in his mind. A gamble, he said weakly, more to himself than anything, but all eyes turned to him. What do you mean, Wyatt? Asked Milcades. I'm likely wrong about this, but Duke Draymore knows about the increased raider assaults and incursions. Maybe he didn't call them, but he had to know they were coming in some way, right? But since he doesn't want a civil war to happen, then he let the Drazen in because he thought he'd be the Lord Regent, Wyatt explained. But as he spoke, the confidence behind his words grew little by little. Those that built the black ships called the Drazen to put pressure on the Principality. If the Duke failed to become regent, they would be a threat, and they'd be able to move far more easily inside the Principality. But if the Duke became regent, then he could rally the Royal Navy against the Drazen threat. And who else what else? If the Duke's secret allies could tempt raiders into attacking, then maybe they also convinced the Arabians and the hierarchy. Astute observation, and one I fear is the most likely too. A gamble in which there are no losers, only profits. One is greater than the other, but both are beneficial. I personally do not believe the hierarchy will involve itself in our conflict. Otherwise, we would have heard about any possible incursion by now and beforehand, Redford confessed, crossing his arms. But the Arabian Commonwealth? They wouldn't pass up such an opportunity if they were informed. Whoever these secretive benefactors are, they do not wish to see the Principality destroyed, but rightfully under control of Duke Draymore. For what reason? I dare not speculate. Clara sighed softly. Her calm and collected mood returned. We don't have any indication as to who the culprit could be. We have 6 possible perpetrators, one of which I can certainly rule out, for such cloak-and-dagger tactics are not their way. She paused for a moment to move a strand of hair away from her face. The diviners. Figures, Milcades agreed with a nod. Too distant, Too caught up in their own affairs. Too isolationist. Just getting to message them is a chore, he said with a chortle. That leaves the Albion Federation, the Chin-Shu Commonality, the Imperium, the Zarma Compact, and though far away, I wouldn't be surprised if the Tilgor Alliance had a hand in this. You can rule out the Imperium, Jincho said all of a sudden. They couldn't make these ships. Oh? Clara beamed, looking at the Akanti with a charming smile. What makes you say that, my dear Jincho? The Imperium is far superior in almost every regard compared to the Principality. Because pretty eyes, they have the tech, but the way the ship was made, from top to bottom, from the reactor to the service tunnels, and all the way to the electrical bits, and the design would make Imperium officials weep. Too smooth, too elegant. Imperium ships are more cramped, have fewer people in them, more firepower. Have seen a few wrecks and schematics before. Trust me, pretty eyes, the Imperium didn't make such beautiful ships, Jincho proclaimed with absolute certainty. You wouldn't happen to deduce who is responsible, now would you? Cynthia asked, raising an eyebrow. Not a chance, Jincho countered. I could still be wrong. Main manufacturers and styles are one thing, but the Noir Navio and more black ships could have been made by private organizations, powerful groups, independent, unaccounted, narrow a point of origin. I can do that, but I don't have permission to dig deeper, to tear and open, to understand and learn. Silently, Clara and Redford shared a glance, their pupils flickering softly for a few seconds before the princess returned her attention to the Akanti. And if you had the permission? Jincho bobbed his head eagerly, 6 eyes fixated on the blonde woman. I could learn many things, do many things. I'll need to inform my brother dearest before I make any decisions on this matter, Clara replied. Then she turned to Wyatt, her voice softening slightly. Is something the matter, Wyatt? Wyatt turned to face Clara, then nodded slowly. I'm thinking, he said with a faint frown. Clara, if Duke Draymore had become regent, would the Drazen Raiders have been pushed back and exterminated? That would have been the most likely outcome, yes, Clara replied without reservation. My uncle is a capable man. He would have rallied the Royal Navy and every other military branch to not only secure the safety of the Principality, but to reclaim fallen systems and crack down on criminal, rebel, and other such organizations with extreme prejudice. Being the Lord Regent would grant him an almost supreme but temporary authority to oversee the Principality's affairs as he deemed best. Wyatt's frown deepened. If he had become regent, the prince? He asked, not wanting to voice his question in full out of precaution. If he had objected against the decision of the council, our positions would be reversed, with us as the traitors instead of him, Clara revealed with a tinge of sadness. There is no point in dwelling on such matters. What has been done is done. We have much to plan for and a situation to resolve thanks to your little faux pas, Wyatt, she remarked with no ill will in her voice. Wyatt's expression shifted to one of confusion. What do animal paws have to do with anything? Cynthia closed her eyes as she took in a deep breath. Clara giggled. Redford shook his head. Jincho chirped, and Milcady smiled widely at his question. Faux pas, my dear Wyatt, is a way to describe an indiscretion or mistake made in certain social circles, Clara answered. The black-haired pilot understood at that moment what Clara was referring to. I don't suppose an apology will be enough. I'm afraid not, Wyatt. Do you understand the gravity of what your outburst caused and why it can be dangerous? Cynthia asked. Wyatt nodded, crossing his arms. I insulted their way of life and everything dear to them. Thanks to one of my squad mates, I've come to understand the position of the least privileged nobles better. His tone was serious and his gaze solid as he continued. But I don't regret what I said. We were lucky the plan worked out the way it did. Otherwise, I don't think many of them would have returned. That is one aspect, Wyatt. The other is that your words could easily be interpreted as you questioning the system and the Principality as a whole. It questions your loyalty and puts your superiors in a precarious position. They have every right to protest and point at what they perceive not only as an insult, but as a potential threat to the status quo. Redford sighed. It is all they know, all we know. It is an almost sacred thing deeply rooted in dogmatic tradition. It is how the principality works, is what they all think. To deviate from it is to question House Astor, the Council of Nobles, and the principality. Many rebellions, uprisings, and insurgent movements have been born of such opinions. To deviate from the norm is perceived as crass, barbaric, nefarious, dishonorable, and dangerous, Redford explained and warned simultaneously. We will handle that issue later. However, know that you will be punished to some capacity. Bluster or not, I can't simply dismiss their complaints, but I will not allow them to undermine you. Wyatt bowed his head. I understand, Commander. I will accept whatever punishment deemed fit. Good, Redford replied, then turned to Clara. For now, I shall explain my current plan of action. The map came to life. Thanks to their jammers, it's impossible for us to know their exact positions, but our long-range cameras were able to faintly detect their precious cattle ship, crippled by Operation Weedwhacker. 2 small dots appeared moving slowly toward the last known location of the shipyard. The torpedoes are making their way to their objective. They will be detected once their timers end and their thrusters reactivate. The Drazen will send out fighters to intercept and destroy them. The map focused on the Noir Navio, already leaving the 5th planet behind under moderate propulsion. Once I'm back on the bridge, I shall dispatch 2 more torpedoes directed at their cattle ship. That will force them to intercept the torpedoes. Wyatt, you shall take every available fighter we have and create a sphere around the Noir Navio within the protective curtain of our PD turrets. Redford paused, taking in a deep breath to calm himself. We're facing 2 cruisers and a minimum of 6 destroyers. 8 if the other 2 running patrol were ordered to return and protect the cattle ship, plus an unknown number of fighters, at least 4 frigates, and whatever other surprises their mobile habitat has to offer. Those fighters hunting our wing, for example, I've seen them before. An optimized model preferred by the Collective itself, the commander revealed. Does this mean the Collective is directly involved? Clara asked, as the whisper of worry could be detected in her tone. Hardly. The likely answer is that the Collective built the ship and the, let's us say, colonists took it for themselves. Maybe they were raiders from the start, maybe not. It doesn't really matter since they are here and down on the planet. We lack any data of what's happening planet-side, but we all know what their objective is, Redford declared dryly. Can we do anything for the inhabitants? They may be rebels and traitors, but, Wyatt asked tentatively. There's nothing we can do right now. We must first secure space superiority. Then we can worry about any theoretical next step. We've done everything we can to give us every possible advantage, but it won't last for much longer. We may be invisible to them, but with their jammers active, our assault capabilities are vastly diminished until we destroy their cruisers and the source of their jammers, explained the aged commander. You're not considering engaging them head-on, old man, Cynthia said, looking at the gray-haired man intently. Are you? I will sacrifice stealth in exchange for deadly firepower, but I won't announce my presence blatantly before I'm ready to strike, Redford clarified, smirking. A single ship will perform a Thornback maneuver. Strike at the enemy with overwhelming firepower in a dedicated formation. His smirk widened. I'll simply forgo the formation part and strike from the black. I may be a commander, but I'm a fighter pilot. Old habits die hard. There was a moment of silence until Jincho stood to his feet and pointed at Cynthia. Question. Why not let Blue Ghost take command, like she did in Jintrax? Blue Ghost, Cynthia muttered with indignation as she stared daggers at the offending Yakanti, much to Clara's amusement. Your insolence aside, I only took command of the Noir Navio out of necessity. Everything I know about ship command I learned from Redford. Jincho blinked with all 6 eyes, then nodded. Understood. Continuing with our stratagem, we know the Drazen won't stray too far away from the cattle ship. This will limit their options, but they will be on high alert and fight with increased fervor. We will run hot once the battle commences. A full alpha strike will prove to be decisive, Redford pointed out. Once the battle commences, Wyatt, I want you and your fighters to peel off and swarm any target of opportunity as you see fit. Sir, Wyatt saluted, his gaze resolute. Milkades, you know what to do. Be ready. Redford said cryptically, and the captain nodded in understanding. Meeting adjourned. Return to your posts. Wyatt and Jincho saluted one last time and left together. After a few moments of silence, Wyatt looked down at his feathered companion with a faint smile on his lips. I felt your improvements at work. Think you can make more? Maybe. The data you gave me will help. Bring more data, more I can do. Jincho replied, rubbing his hands eagerly. Hope you survive. I like you, Wormbrain. Likewise, Jincho. Maybe it's because Volantis is infested with Clixal and other avian creatures, but I have a fondness for Yakanti in general, said Wyatt. You say that because you haven't met proper hierarchy Yakanti. Can't stand them. Rotten. Stupid. Feather brains, Jincho complained. I'll take your word for it, Wyatt replied, his smile widening for a second before he noticed a man escorted by 4 Marines making their way down the hall. He frowned and lowered his voice. Not this idiot. Who? Jincho asked before taking notice of the man and his escorts. Ah, the bloody one, he said, displeased. As the man approached, Wyatt and Jincho stopped, putting their backs against the wall to allow him passage. Unfortunately for them, the escort stopped, parted ways, and Istanel Ferentis turned to them. How may I serve you, Lord Istanel? Asked Wyatt with an unreadable expression. Please, Sir Wyatt, call me Istanel. You may be a knight banneret, but your direct service under House Astor elevates you immensely. Superior to you I'm still, but my respect is genuine, I assure you, Istanel remarked, then turned his gaze to Jincho. Ah, I was unaware that you were close to one of the delightful Ikanti on board. Magnificent specimen. Oh, the things I could learn from you. Sorry, but I don't fancy the idea of being on an operating table, Jincho replied, unamused but somewhat respectful. By his standards, that is. Who said anything of such barbarity? Istanel gasped, wounded. I was referring to a friendly discussion over refreshments and some Kazgali meat for you, technician. You have Kazgali? Jincho asked, his eyes sparkling for a moment, then shook his head. Tempted to accept, but not now. Much work to be done. Work never ends. Istanel laughed softly. Diligent. Now, with my personal interests satisfied, Sir Wyatt, when can we expect to board the cattle ship? I may not be welcomed on the bridge or in your strategic meetings, but my authorization within the network suffices. You crippled it easily, and it is ripe for exploration and collection. How long must I wait before the remaining Drazen forces are dealt with? Our victory isn't guaranteed, Lord Istanel. We are doing everything we can to eliminate their combat capabilities before we can even consider doing anything else, Wyatt replied, his expression unchanging, though internally he wanted nothing more than end the conversation already. Every second that passed only served to lower his already dismal opinion of the elegantly dressed, long-haired, petty blue blood that fancied himself as a xenobiologist in front of him. Istanel shook his head slowly. Ah, Sir Wyatt, you once more remind me why the military was never of any interest of mine. I prefer to dwell in certainty, not probability. Victory shall be ours for the simple fact that Her Majesty is with us. There is no reason to fear when all you have to do is destroy the enemies that stand in our way. After victory is secured, the real difficult task shall be left to those of us privileged with far greater minds. I want to punch him. I've never met someone I'd want to punch in the face more than this arrogant blue blood, Wyatt thought, as he nodded once, noting that even the Marines escorting him were annoyed with their charge. Your confidence is reassuring, Lord Istanel. If I may ask, are you perhaps seeking Her Majesty's counsel? Why would I when she made it clear my presence is not desired? I do not wish to impose myself upon her and risk our silent agreement and amicable relationship. Istanel answered carelessly. I'm currently heading to the mess hall. Both Wyatt and Jincho's minds staggered for a second as they processed what Istanel had just said. You're going to eat now? With danger lurking? A battle closing on us? Jincho asked, incredulous. What my companion is trying to say, Lord Istanel, is this: do you believe it is a wise choice? Wyatt quickly jumped in instinctively. Istanel waved a hand in dismissal. It may seem odd to you, but I had to reschedule my meal times thanks to that pesky battle. I must confess that I am quite famished. No general warning has been issued, so there is no reason for me to delay my meal any longer. It is a shame that your duties prevent you from joining me, Sir Wyatt. I would have enjoyed seeing your expression of succulent delight the moment a slice of cedar-planked salmon. A tiny, smug, almost mocking smirk appeared on his lips for just a moment, but it was there long enough for Wyatt to notice it. "Enjoy your meal, Lord Istanel," Wyatt replied, bowing his head. As Istanel resumed his walk, a wicked idea wormed its way into Wyatt's mind. A terrible, maliciously petty, beautiful, wicked idea. "Lord Istanel." Istanel stopped after only taking 5 steps, turning his attention to Wyatt with mild curiosity. "After the cattle ship is secured, you'll be the first to board it, won't you, Lord?" Wyatt asked humbly. Istanel turned around completely, confusion visible across his face. "Pardon? I believe I heard you incorrectly. Sir Wyatt, are you implying I would join the fight at any measure and risk my life needlessly?" Straightening his posture, Wyatt continued. "Oh, it seems I was mistaken, Lord Istanel. I'm terribly sorry if my words were misunderstood. It would be naive of me to see you in any field of combat," said the pilot as he grinned internally. "I merely thought that you, being a man of science and given your field of expertise, would personally oversee any possible captured Drezen and take your pick, securing the best specimens for yourself once the enemy is dealt with and no danger may be encountered." He spared a second to measure the reactions from his escort, but their lack of surprise and vague exchanging glances told him enough. For several seconds, Istanel stared at Wyatt with calculating, inspecting eyes, but his gaze failed to even chip at his practiced mask of submission and indifference. You bring up a good point, Sir Wyatt. I admit I had not considered taking to the field myself to retrieve any specimens. I was simply going to take among the possible survivors and be done with it. However, your words have made me reconsider and see the logic behind it." Istanel smiled. "It seems that His Majesty the Prince elevated you for more than your skills in the art of distributing death and mayhem against the enemies of the Principality. There is a spark of brilliance that I can now appreciate. I will consider your suggestion, Sir Staples. I wish you luck in your endeavors and hope that you survive the coming battle," he proclaimed with utmost sincerity. With a slight bow of his head, he turned around and continued on his way. Jincho and Wyatt stared at the man for several seconds. Then they, too, resumed their journey. A minute later, the Akanti spoke up. "Blue Ghost is scary and sees me with hungry eyes, but the Bloody One is creepy. Have seen him stare me and my friends with ravaging stares. Fool wants to take Drezen captives? Idiot, empty head. I do not like him. He's a butt." Wyatt chuckled in response. He really liked the Akanti now, but his plan wasn't complete. Not yet. "Say, Jincho, could you hack into any suit aboard the Noir Navio? Comms are one thing. Links are easy too, but hack into armor suits completely? Depends. Royal Marines are out of the question, though." "Why?" Jincho asked with deep interest. Wyatt smiled. "Would you like to help give Istanel a lesson?" Jincho's eyes widened for a moment, then narrowed dangerously. "Hack his armor? Not a difficult task. What do you need, maniac?" Noir Navio, debriefing room. "It is an outrage, Commander. Your Majesty?" One noble protested as the rest of the pilots present nodded in agreement from their respective seats. "Wyatt Staples should be removed from his position for his outburst." "I concur," a lady added, arms crossed tightly with indignation. "Can we trust a man who questions millennia-old tradition? No matter how skillful he may be, he's a potential danger to us all. What if he decided to defect to the traitors, or, worse yet, betray the Principality and the trust the Prince himself has bestowed upon his unworthy self? This is why commoners should never be considered to rise to nobility. They know nothing of the honorable ways to wage war," another added. "It is clear that he wishes to retain all the glory for himself. His words were meant to shame us into compliance." "The fool, treacherous backstabber," came a cry from the back. As more pilots made their concerns and opinions known, Redford, Clara, and Cynthia listened to their protests silently but intently. After leaving the war room, they came straight to the present debriefing room where every surviving pilot, minus the composters and the ones in medical, was present, summoned by the commander to voice their concerns. Expectedly, the more vocal ones had wasted no time in announcing themselves. The rest either gave them a silent approval or chose not to speak against them. A small group, mostly made up of commoners with only a handful of nobles in their midst, were disapproving of what was being said, but knowing they had no power or sway to compete, elected to do the only thing they could do: glare quietly. The aged commander glanced at the stoic Clara awaiting her signal. She barely had to lift an index finger a few seconds later for him to act. Slowly, he stood up and the barrage of complaints ceased. He looked around his gathered pilots, 62 in total. He stood straight, pressed his uniform, and took out his handkerchief only to properly fold it and return it to his chest pocket. He truly preferred his armor given their precarious situation, but protocol forced him to present himself in his uniform. When he was finished, he gazed upon his pilots again with a steely, unwavering gaze. I understand your frustrations. I've reviewed not only the battle footage, but the formal complaints and your own recordings as well. Her Majesty, Princess Clara Astor, he said, glancing at her and nodding once, has done the same, and we've reached certain conclusions regarding this delicate matter. However, it is prudent to make certain observations. Respectfully, Commander, but what else is there to consider? Asked one of the protesters. Wyatt Staples has insulted us. He has insulted you, his direct superior. He has insulted Her Majesty, Princess Clara. He has insulted the prince himself and the principality at large. His words cannot be interpreted in any other way. I agree on that last remark, Redford concurred, leaving the speaker and half the pilots present stunned for a moment. Lieutenant Wyatt Staples was reckless and didn't measure the weight of his words. There was no consideration in his claims. However, where you hear only insults and suspect treason, deception, and threats, I hear a deep-rooted lamentation and a genuine concern for the lives of others. Before any protests could arise, the large screen above him came to life. It showed not only sensor data, but the perspective from Wyatt's cockpit. Firstly, as you can see and remember, you were being pursued by a considerable force of enemy fighters and 4 frigates in hot pursuit. I'll be completely frank with you. Once I was informed of the number of enemies hunting you down, I expected no more than 20% of you to survive that encounter. If that. I considered a total loss to be more than likely. Can any of you argue against this information? He was met with silence for several seconds. Only grimacing faces and unintelligible grumbles could be discerned among his pilots until one was brave enough to speak up. Commander, while this is true, the tactics Lieutenant Wyatt Staples employed and had us follow were unconventional. Unconventional shouldn't be a surprise anymore when dealing with Sir Wyatt Staples, Redford replied, and the screen changed again, this time showing a very different situation. You've all seen the scanner recordings on Gintrax. Specifically, I am talking about the now infamously named the Woodshaft Ace. I have been authorized by Her Majesty to show you the fighter recording itself. Observe. Redford looked up, watching the recording he'd now memorized. The recording wasn't complete. It began from the moment Wyatt detected the Drazen fighters and ended moments after the last one was destroyed. And so it began. The desperation in Wyatt's voice, the quick turn from panic to righteous fury and resolution. It all happened so fast. The split-second decision to use his tactical mind in such a manner, the hard, bone-breaking turns, the lightning-fast reflexes, and that indomitable, terrifyingly focus and disregard for his own safety. But in the end, it resulted in his victory. Barely. The recording ended and he analyzed the expressions of his pilots. Most were in disbelief, others were simply stunned silent. Sir Wyatt Staples is an unconventional man who relies on unconventional methods as demonstrated. I do not have to remind everyone that, thanks to his planning, one stealth cruiser was taken down, and more importantly, how his unconventional tactics ended up saving not only my life, but that of our beloved princess, Redford said firmly, and everyone shuddered, unable to counter his argument. The screen shifted back to the first recording before he continued. Secondly, Wedge leaders, could any of you propose to me a viable strategy against such odds? The Wedge leaders, Alpha 1, Beta 1, and Gamma 1 exchanged glances. The first two stared down Gamma 1, the one among them who openly questioned Wyatt's orders in the field, and one of those who had sent a formal complaint. Outnumbered and feeling the pressure around him, he succumbed. Without relying on the lieutenant's tactics, I would have ordered the activation of our afterburners and a scattering of our forces. I would have also used the commoner pilots as a screen to delay as many enemies as possible, sir. Thank you, Rupert Jelani. What about you, Samshal Ortensi and Viviano Divisetti? Redford pressed on. An all-out counter-assault. Better to die in glory than to allow capture or worse, replied Viviano Beta 1. Scatter and follow standard procedure, replied Samshal rather unimaginatively. Know this, I do not condone your answers. They are expected. Our general strategies, contingency plans, emergency protocols, and battlefield tactics are ingrained into us from the moment we enter the academy. To think that we, as pilots, are offered far more liberty of independent thought as battlefield circumstances are ever-shifting speaks volumes. Redford, stopping himself from saying anything too damning, but just enough to let his words sink in. Now watch, he said as the video began to play. Panicked cries and declarations of certain death were heard, but Wyatt never wavered. The audio had to be edited slightly, eliminating or altering some of Wyatt's private comments to avoid fanning the flames of the offended nobles. The recording proceeded until the first missile minefield was reached and its subsequent result and discussion. The video paused. As you can clearly observe, Lieutenant Wyatt was quick to understand that a head-on engagement was preposterous and would end in a total loss. Instead, he opted for another approach. The screen zoomed to the reading that showcased the potential shield strength of the enemy fighters. His focus was not to destroy, but to search for an alternative. He found it. The video continued up until his new strategy was formed and then shared with the wedge leaders, seeking their input. I want you all to think deeply about what just happened here. Your wing leader was not only able to form a viable plan of attack, he did so under pressure, knowing his limitations, taking into account the enemy's strength, and how were they likely to respond, and then shared the information with those that needed to know about it, not as a direct order, but seeking more options to further adapt his plan, all to increase the probability of success as much as possible. Cowardly tactics conjured by an honorless Cretan, one complained. That may be so, but had he chosen a conventional approach, it is likely none of you or just a handful would be here now. Redford knew he was laying it thick on them, but they had to acknowledge that Wyatt had saved their lives. The recording continued up until the plan was executed, and Wyatt issued the command to engage the surviving enemy. Unconventional plan. Thinking outside the box. Wyatt Staples is callous and brutal, efficient and deadly. His plan showed no remorse for his enemies. A cowardly trap to some, a brilliant gamble to others. Had just one element failed, the consequences would have been devastating. Before we continue, and despite your protests, I wish to congratulate you all for obeying your wing leader's orders. I am aware of your personal misgivings and doubts leading up to this precise moment, but you all decided to follow him, for he signified your best chance of success and survival. Lastly, look closely. The recording resumed playing, and the battle was revived before everyone's eyes. Redford glanced back at Clara, who pretended to remain stoic and ever dignified, but he just knew she was screaming internally. He wondered how many times she'd replay the footage in her private time. The battle ended mere moments later in their astonishing victory, even if 3 more pilots died in the process. The recording ended, as Wyatt's outburst was not necessary at the moment. Did anyone detect the oddity? Redford asked, the instructor and teacher in him surfacing. A voice at the back, meek but valiant, made itself heard. Lieutenant Wyatt Staples focused all of his efforts in supporting and trying to save others instead of preoccupying himself with seeking kills. Redford smiled as over half of his pilots nodded in agreement, whilst others slowly realized the truth in those words. Exactly. This is the reason why his outburst, crude and crass as it was born not from a place of malice or treason, but out of genuine concern and frustration. To him, victory and fulfilling his mission is more important than increasing his status, earning accolades, or covering his name with glory, honor, and prestige. Take into consideration the high stakes and the weight set upon his shoulder at that moment. Adrenaline and tempers were running hot. It does not excuse him, for he shall be properly punished. Be assured of that. Even if you say that, Commander, it is easy for him to make such claims. He was elevated and catapulted to a high position of honor and reverence. We don't know where he came from or what his true goals are. That man is dangerous and a fake. He's a selfish, arrogant manipulator. He has to be. The nonconformist's gaze landed on the blonde princess for a second before looking away. If you are so discontent with him, then you can resign, for I shall not remove him from his current position and rank. Redford replied, his voice heavy, firm, and solid as titanium. I personally picked you all to serve in this ship, not for your status, but for your skills. You were the best I had at my disposal, and this is all you can offer? His cybernetic eyes set upon all of them at the same time. You dare insinuate that he's been privileged to an obscene capacity, that I, and Her Majesty, no less, are here before you, listening to your complaints and giving you due credit, isn't proof enough that you are valued? I could have disregarded your complaints without giving further thought or notice. Or have you forgotten that this vessel is not part of the Royal Navy itself? Taking her cue, Clara stood up and every pilot present froze. This is my ship. Royal Navy standards and their usual regulations are, simply put, a mere suggestion to me, for it is I who hold supreme authority on the decisions carried at all times. I have heard you all, and I respond with the following. Resign those who cannot accept the coming changes, for there will be many to come. If you are so weak-willed as to be timorous, defeated by actions performed out of necessity and circumstance, then leave in shame, return to your homes, and don't pester me again with your infantile misgivings, said the princess with absolute authority. Or, she continued, her tone shifting to a warmer, welcoming one that made every pilot look at her in mild confusion. You can stay and serve diligently as loyal sons and daughters of the principality. As proof of your service, your records shall be treated as special postings. Your salaries will remain the same, but each year of service will count as 2. Your records shall also carry the Astorian feather, undeniable evidence that you served directly under the orders of House Astor, she proclaimed with a gentle smile as everyone was left stunned. Cynthia, if you will. Gladly, my princess. Cynthia cleared her throat and her voice boomed slightly, echoing in the room. Due to the concerns presented by one Wyatt Staples, Her Majesty Princess Clara Astor has agreed to repair and refit your combat armor and equipment, free of charge, as a suitable recompense for not only carrying out your mission to success, but for scoring a devastating victory set against overwhelming odds. Furthermore, it has been decided that every surviving pilot shall receive a mark of veterancy, and a formal commendation shall, too, be added to your records. That is all. The silence that followed was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Loyalty is its own reward, said the princess, and a reward can come in many forms. Sadly, those repairs and maintenance can't be performed until the battle is ended. Rest assured they will come, and Lieutenant Wyatt Staples shall be punished. As a precautionary measure, every scored kill achieved during the skirmish shall be denied to him. Now, you're all dismissed. The pilots, one by one, stood up, bowed deeply before the princess, or proclaimed their unflinching loyalty to the principality, sometimes both. Once the trio was alone, Cynthia shook her head. Was that needed, Clara? So much unnecessary flair. Where is your love theatrics and drama, Cynthia? Clara argued, crossing her arms. Don't you agree, Redford? It has its uses, replied the older man in a non-committal manner. You are quite fond of them after all. Only if they can serve a purpose, Clara countered, and serve us they did. You're not concerned that you may have overindulged them? Cynthia asked with disinterest. I'll shatter the fangs of any pretentious snake who believes they can bend you to their capricious, tedious, and selfish needs, my princess. It is always a possibility, but a moment of annoyance is not worth my attention. By giving them the small things and some praising words to stroke their egos, the loud voices will be silenced, the undecided shall find new purpose, and the silent supporters will be emboldened, reassured and put to ease. Her good mood shifted instantly, and her serious expression returned. Can we win, Redford? I like our odds, replied the aged commander. They're not the best, but they are favorable. He paused for a moment. Battles can be chaotic and ever-shifting, he warned. Clara closed her eyes, then opened them as she turned to her bodyguard. Then let us prepare for any outcome. If we must flee, you have my permission to do so. Don't let that be a last resort, Redford. If you deem the situation to be unwinnable, do as you must, the blonde woman ordered. And may fortune favor us.